Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Van Balen with SunWorld Property Management. And if you're a landlord in Washington State, understand the eviction process to protect your rental property is of utmost importance. Evictions are never easy, but handling the eviction the wrong way can lead to legal trouble and major financial losses. Today, I'll walk you through the eviction process in Washington State and what you can expect. First, I'm going to give you an overview, and we'll discuss each one of these topics. When and why a landlord can legally evict a tenant, required notice periods and legal steps, how to properly serve an eviction notice, what happens if the tenant refuses to leave, the role of the courts, and when a landlord can regain possession. The when and why a landlord can legally evict a tenant. It could be, number one, non-payment of rent. Two, it could be on a 10-day notice to comply with the rental agreement. So let's look at the first one, the 10-day notice, which sometimes can be very difficult to do an eviction. Maybe it's roommates. They have unauthorized roommates, which is very hard to evict on. Maybe an unauthorized pet. Maybe they're creating a disturbance. If they comply with the rental agreement in the compliance period of 10 days, the notice is basically deemed to be satisfied and end of story. If they don't comply with the rental agreement, then you're going to have to file an eviction based on the 10-day notice. So the first thing is, anyway, when you do this 10-day notice, it's very important to reference the violation in the rental agreement. Now, on the 10-day notice, one caveat is that if you give 4 10-day notices in a 12-month period, you can evict based on giving 4 in a 12-month period. Now, you can't stack them. So in other words, you can't go out. They left garbage cans out, for example, and it's a violation of the lease. And you knew that they had another violation at the same time. So you can't go out and give 10-day notices for each one of these violations. What you need to do is give a 10-day notice for those violations that you're aware of now. Now, a week later, or 2 weeks later, or a month later, there's another violation. Sure, you can go out and give another 10-day notice, but the courts will frown upon you stacking the notices, just trying to get rid of a bad tenant. And now, on the 14-day pay-or-vacate, that's another notice. So you can give a 14-day notice for the tenant not paying rent. So now on the notice periods, on the 10-day notice, you give a 10-day notice, and of course the day you serve the notice doesn't count. And then you're going to serve the notice, and if you don't get personal service on each one of the tenants, you're going to have to leave a copy with one tenant. If nobody's home, then you can post it to the door, and then you're going to have to mail, U.S. mail, not certified. That is not a requirement anymore. And you have to allow 5 extra days before you file the eviction from the date you drop the notice in the mail. The 14-day notice is the same. You deliver the notice. If you don't get personal service, you have to mail, you post a copy or leave the copies with a person, preferably a person over 18 or 18 or older, and then you mail the copies. Again, you have to allow 5 extra days for the date you mailed it, and it's U.S. mail, not certified. At this point, it's just a waiting game, either on the 10-day or the 14-day notice to see if the tenant complies. If they don't comply within the time period, then you file the eviction. So the next step that's going to happen is it's going to be a court appearance, normally what is called a show cause hearing. Now, one thing in Washington State is that if the tenant is allowed free legal service from an attorney, they will get that. So they basically have to feel they can't afford, they have to show that they do not have funds to pay for a lawyer. and then a lawyer will be assigned to their case. So generally what happens is your first court appearance, you're going to have, they're going to try to get an attorney, and then it's going to delay the case. So you're going to have to be patient. So after your eviction is filed and you have the court date, you're probably not going to get anywhere with the first court date. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks later after that. During that time period, there may be, if there is an attorney involved, there may be some negotiation that the tenant leaves. And very common now in Washington is that they'll negotiate and the tenant will leave and won't have an eviction on their record. So that's really important, and don't be surprised if that happens. So let's say that either the tenant doesn't appear in court or you win. There's no settlement between the parties and you get your eviction. Then the next thing, it's another waiting game, and it's called writ of possession. And this is the time where, as a landlord, you just have to sit back and wait. Unless you find out or the tenant contacts you and said they have left, you need to wait for the sheriff. And the sheriff will once you get this writ of possession, the sheriff will clear the unit or the home and then give you possession back. At that point, you could change the locks. Any contents left in the house, you put it out on the street. Evictions can be very dangerous, so it's very important you wait for the sheriff and you ascertain whether or not the tenant is still there. If the tenant is still there, they will escort them out of the property. Make sure you have crew to take care of getting the contents out of the house and get the locks changed. Another avenue you may want to explore is cash for keys. So in other words, you have this tenant that you're ready to file an eviction on. They're going to tie up your property. You're going to lose thousands of dollars in rent, plus you're going to have legal fees. It may be better to offer them money to leave. Now, you got to be very careful with this, and you got to set the terms down beforehand, which is in writing. And generally, you're going to say, once you get the house empty and all contents is removed, we'll give you a check. And then you show up at the property with a check. And then what you do is you have a crew ready to change the locks, so forth. And then you get possession. That's one way you can avoid a lot of tying up your property. But again, you must be very careful on how you orchestrate this. One way to avoid costly eviction would be that hiring a property management company where the expertise in leasing and lease drafting leases and so forth and background checks can avoid having a problem where you wind up with an eviction. At the SunWorld Group, we handle screening, enforce lease terms, and collect rent on your behalf, so you don't have to deal with late payments and the legal hassles. So feel free to reach out and contact us here at the SunWorld Group for all your landlord needs. I would like to stress that eviction laws actually in the state of Washington could vary by the city, so I would suggest before you file an eviction, consult a legal expert before taking any action. Now, this video is for general information and is not legal advice. So keep in mind, proper screening and proper leases can avoid an eviction later on. Eviction should always be a last resort. A solid lease and thorough tenant screening can help these situations before they start. If you found this video helpful, give this video a like and subscribe for more landlord tips. Thank you for watching.